Hi guys, and welcome back to yet another episode of Learn Laravel the Easy Way. Laravel is very big on separation of concerns. What do I mean by separation of concerns? Laravel is very big around the aspect of separating concepts into various files. For example, there was the route, there was the controller, there was the view, there are different things. So things like validation rules, right? In these cases, validation rules become really long. Laravel has made it possible for you to extract these rules and send to a different file, and that is called a form request. And you can create that form request file using artisan command. I'm going to take us to the left side. So if you open this, you're going to see how it looks like. So what we're going to do is we're going to open our terminal. We're going to write PHP artisan make request, right? So make request, submit contact form request. So when we say make request, we want to make a particular request validation, make request, and we want to call it submit contact form request. And if we hit enter, right? If we hit enter, you will see that you come to the HTTP. Another folder has been created called request, right? Another folder has been created called request. So if you open this request, you will see that the file that we created or the artisan command that we ran created this file, submit contact form request. So if you open this request file, it's a nice and simple file, right? It has the first function, determine if the user is authorized to make this request. By default, it is false. So in case you're having an application that is sensitive, you may want to write something like a validation rule here based on authentication, but by default, we're going to change this one to true, right? Because all users are authorized to submit the contact us form, right? So, but if it was a case where this was a different kind of form that specific kind of user are supposed to submit, you can write a full validation rule here, or you can write a full authorization rule here to give the users the right to access this. We go to the next function. Now, you see the next function says public function rules. It says get the validation rule that applies to the request. Now, this is the validation rule, but again, we had already written the validation rule inside public controller. So this is the validation rule that we had written. So we can come here and nice and simply copy this, or we cut this, and we come to this part and we paste it here, right? So these validation rules have been applied, right? These validation rules have been applied here. And when we are able to use these rules here, we can come back here and say, okay, if we have applied these validation rules instead in this file, how do we implement the validation here? So we can comment this out and say, rather than us saying that we're going to inject request, we're going to inject this time around submit contact form request, right? It's the same thing that we have done. So this request, contact form request, it extends the request HTTP class, right? The HTTP facet, so it extends this particular class. So once you're done with this, it's still the same thing. So if I refresh the page and I go here and I go and open my form, I go back and I refresh it, I submit, everything still works nice and easy. And if we attempt to put it, we submit, it still works nice and easy. And then if we add more, we submit, it goes as planned. So if this is a way for you to ensure that you have separated your validation rules in a separate file, right? So your validation rules are found only inside request, submit, contact form request. So all of the validation rules, they remain the same. All we've done is we have moved it to a separate file to ensure that we have our code looking nice and clean and the controller is doing only controller work, then the validation file is doing the validation work. And then we can now also see that once we want to extract data from this, right? For us to extract data from this, you say DD, you can say request validated. So this is validated data is equal to that, and then we can do a DD of validated data. I'm going to comment all of this out. because we don't need it. And then we go back to our form. And if we refresh this, I submit a form that has enough information, right? And then I click contact us. So this has been clearly validated, and the validated response has been saved in a variable, and then we have run a DD, and then we're displaying the data. So in this tutorial, you've seen how to move your validation rules from the controller to a validation form request class, and then you're able to extract the data of the validated request by doing request validated, right? By calling the request validated, and you can display that data like that. So that is how you move the validation to a separate class to ensure that your controller does only controller work and your validation does only validation work. It may look too complicated now. It may look like we're using so many files, but as you start working with so many projects, you will notice that the amount of code that you're going to write has to be well structured in a way that you don't have to stress in looking at validation inside controllers, and you keep validation inside only the validation files.